I want you to imagine uh, something for a second. Just picture this. Imagine you have a bank account, right? And every single year when you get your annual statement, the balance goes up,
Sounds like a pretty great bank account.
right? It looks amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, your salary seems to be increasing. The numbers are climbing.
Yeah.
And if anyone asks, you'd probably be like, yeah, I'm doing pretty well for myself.
Sure, you'd feel rich.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here is the catch. Secretly, without you fully realizing the long-term math of it all, the bank is actually funding that account by selling off pieces of your actual house.
Oh, wow. Okay, that took a turn.
Yeah, right. Like first they sell the guest bedroom furniture, then, I don't know, they sell the copper wiring right out of the walls,
Oh, man.
then the roof tiles. So on paper, your income looks like it's growing. But in reality, you are like slowly liquidating your own foundation. You're facing bankruptcy and you're just celebrating this illusion of wealth right up until the walls literally cave in.
Well, I mean, it is a terrifying scenario when you put it like that,
Yeah.
because it completely changes the definition of what it means to be, rich.
Right.
You're confusing the liquidation of your assets with the generation of actual sustainable income. It's a psychological trap, honestly, just as much as an economic one, because, well, human beings are wired to look at the immediate cash flow, right? We don't look at the structural integrity of the house.
Let's just look at the cash in hand. Exactly. And that illusion of wealth right up until the walls cave in, that is the exact trap currently swallowing the West African nation of Sierra Leone.
Yeah, it really is.
Which brings us to today's deep dive. Today we're unpacking this really fascinating, custom-tailored 15-page academic intelligence report. It's titled Resource Curse or Development Breakthrough, a socioeconomic insight report on Sierra Leone. And we're going to look at the hard data behind a country that is, famously rich in natural resources.
Incredibly rich. I mean, we are talking about millions of dollars in diamonds, titanium ores, bauxite, iron ore, and just these vast, beautiful forests.
Yeah, it's a nation blessed with just immense natural capital. But when you look closely at the underlying economics from this report, a terrifying reality emerges. And this is the hook for the very first slide of the deck. A metric called the adjusted net savings rate, which we'll definitely get into, it frequently sits at a staggering negative 15%.
Negative 15%.
Yeah. And in some years, it drops much, much lower than that.
Which is it's the ultimate paradox, isn't it?
Totally.
Like, how can a nation that is pulling vast fortunes out of the earth be secretly draining its own wealth? It feels like a total contradiction. If you're mining diamonds and, selling massive amounts of timber, shouldn't your national savings be going through the roof?
You would think so.
Yeah.
Shouldn't the streets be paved with gold? Or at least like well-maintained asphalt.
Right, exactly. That's the baseline assumption. You see the exports, you see these massive cargo ships leaving the port of Freetown loaded with raw materials, and you assume, okay, that equals national prosperity. You assume physical extraction automatically translates into economic elevation.
But according to this report, that assumption is entirely backward.
Completely backward. And what we are exploring today is a phenomenon that development economists call the transformation paradox.
Transformation paradox. Okay, let's unpack this.
So, the true key to Sierra Leone's future, the actual engine of sustainable wealth, isn't buried deep in the soil. It's walking around on top of it. It is the human capital.
The people.
Exactly. And right now, the natural capital is acting as this massive smokescreen, hiding a very severe depletion of the country's long-term potential. The resources are literally blinding the ledger.
Okay, so to understand this paradox, we really first have to look at the traditional economic scorecard, right? GDP, and why it's basically lying to us. Because we're used to using gross domestic product as our economic true north.
We treat it like the ultimate scoreboard.
Right. But in resource-heavy nations, it seems like GDP is essentially a mirage. Let's explore that macro illusion. Because when you look at the historical data for Sierra Leone from the report, the economic engine doesn't just look slow. It looks, well, violently unstable.
Violently unstable is the perfect description. If you trace the historical data on the second slide, you see that the gross national income per capita, the GNI, has seen this very slow, almost agonizingly creeping growth over the decades. It inches up.
Right.
But the GDP per capita growth rate, the actual year-over-year momentum of the economy, is terrifyingly fragile. It is completely exposed to the elements.
Yeah, the volatility is just staggering. The report points out that during external shocks like the Ebola epidemic of 2014 or massive global commodity market crashes or, the COVID-19 pandemic, the GDP growth doesn't just soften.
No, it tanks.
It plummets to astonishing lows. We are talking about growth rates crashing past negative 20% in certain crisis years.
Which is hard to even fathom.
Negative 20%. Like, to put that in perspective for you listening, the 2008 global financial crisis saw the U.S. economy shrink by roughly 2.5%.
Right, and people were panicking.
Exactly. So a 20% contraction is a catastrophic economic freefall.
And what that extreme volatility tells us is that the national economic engine has absolutely no shock absorbers. Zero. It is entirely singularly dependent on global commodity prices and primary resource extraction.
So if the market twitches, they fall over.
Basically, yeah. If the global market price of iron ore drops by a few percentage points, or if a public health crisis forces the mining operations to temporarily halt, the entire national economy just grinds to a halt. There is no diverse, resilient domestic market, no thriving local manufacturing base, no robust domestic services sector to buffer the blow.
So that old saying, right? When the global commodity winds blow cold, Sierra Leone catches pneumonia.
Exactly.
But wait, hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here, or at least just ask the obvious question. If foreign mining conglomerates are pulling billions of dollars in diamonds and bauxite out of the earth, aren't they paying massive taxes?
You'd hope so.
Right. Shouldn't that tax revenue, those royalties, be filling the government's coffers and offsetting this vulnerability? Like, where is that money going, and why isn't it building the shock absorbers you're talking about?
Well, that is the multi-billion-dollar question. And it brings us to the core mechanism of the resource curse. In theory, yes, the taxation of resource extraction should fund national development. But in practice, you have a massive leakage problem.
Leakage.
Yeah. First, multinational mining contracts in developing nations are often negotiated from a position of profound asymmetry. The host nation frequently gives away massive tax holidays or agrees to incredibly low royalty rates just to attract the foreign direct investment in the first place.
So they are practically giving the resources away just to get the mines operational.
Often, yes. And second, whatever revenue does actually get captured by the state often vanishes into immediate short-term consumption rather than long-term investment.
Ah, I see.
It goes to paying bloated public sector wages or servicing existing debt, or quite frankly, it's lost to systemic corruption and elite capture. It is not being converted into new assets. And this is exactly why looking at traditional GDP is so dangerous, and why we have to look at the adjusted net savings rate, that real ledger of national wealth.
Okay, let's break down this adjusted net savings metric, the ANS, because this seems to be the real Rosetta Stone for understanding the country's actual financial health. How does this metric fix the blind spots of traditional GDP?
Let's go back to your opening analogy of the house. Traditional GDP accounting is like the bank teller who only counts the cash deposits. If you cut down a pristine 1,000-year-old forest, process the timber, and sell it on the global market, traditional GDP records that transaction entirely as income.
Right.
It says, congratulations, your economy just produced $10 million worth of wood, your GDP went up.
It counts the cash in the register, but completely ignores the fact that you no longer have a forest.
Exactly. You haven't actually created new wealth out of thin air. You've permanently liquidated a finite physical asset. Adjusted net savings steps in to correct this massive accounting error. It's an honest ledger.
So how does the math work?
Well, it starts with gross national savings, the traditional baseline, but then it subtracts the depletion of natural resources. It literally deducts the estimated value of the minerals dug out of the ground. It deducts the net loss of forests. And incredibly importantly, it even subtracts the estimated health and environmental damages caused by particulate emissions and carbon dioxide.
So it treats the environment, the actual physical soil and canopy of the nation, as a national bank account. And when you withdraw from it, you have to record it as a loss of capital.
Precisely. And on the positive side of the ledger, it adds investments in human capital. So money spent on education, for example, is not treated as a mere expense. It is treated as a true addition to national wealth because you are building the intellectual capital of the future workforce.
So when you apply this honest math to Sierra Leone, the slide shows the picture completely inverts. You start with this tall, seemingly healthy GDP total, but then you subtract the fixed capital consumption, the wear and tear. Then you subtract the massive depletion of minerals.
Right.
And then you subtract the staggering loss of forests. And the data here is jaw-dropping. The report notes that in certain recent years, forest depletion alone accounts for a 16% drain against the gross national income. 16%.
It's an astronomical hemorrhage of natural wealth.
So, wait. what you're saying is that they aren't generating new wealth. They're literally just liquidating their natural capital, like burning your own furniture to keep the house warm and calling it heat production.
That is the textbook definition of the resource curse. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the nation is suffering from negative savings because the wealth extracted from the earth is not being reinvested into assets that hold long-term value. When you reach the bottom line of this accounting, the final adjusted net savings number is deeply submerged below zero. As I mentioned earlier, we are looking at years where the rate hits negative 23.5% and even drops to negative 30.5%. They are heavily in the red while their GDP tells them they are growing.
That is wild. So if the national bank account is draining from resource extraction and the wealth is, bypassing the actual development of the country, that begs a massive question.
What's that?
How are the actual citizens feeding themselves day to day? Like, if the diamond money isn't trickling down to build an economy, what is the workforce actually doing every day? Let's look at the reality on the ground, because this leads us to what the report calls the labor trap.
Yeah, when a nation's primary export sector, mining in this case, is highly mechanized and controlled by foreign capital, it actually employs very few local people relative to the massive wealth it generates. It's an enclave economy. So the vast majority of the population is left entirely outside of that wealth generation loop.
And the data shows exactly where they end up. They end up in the fields. According to the structural dilemma outlined in the report, a massive, overwhelming portion of the workforce is trapped in the agricultural sector. We are looking at 50 to 60%, and historically even higher, of the entire employed population working in agriculture. Over half the country.
Now, agriculture is usually the backbone of any early-stage economy. That in itself isn't necessarily a curse. The problem arises when you look at the disparity between the amount of human effort going into that sector and the economic output coming out of it.
Right, because if you have over half your population working in one sector, you assume that sector is the driving engine of your GDP. But the dual axis chart in the report shows a glaring massive gap. Agriculture employs more than half the people, but it produces a disproportionately tiny fraction of the national economic value added.
And what that massive gap between employment share and GDP contribution screams at us is that this is not high-yield commercial agribusiness. We are not talking about fleets of GPS-guided tractors harvesting thousands of acres of cash crops for global export. We are talking about subsistence farming, survival-level agriculture.
Millions of people engaging in back-breaking manual labor with basic hand tools.
Exactly. It is a massive misallocation of human effort. It's a family on a small plot of land, entirely dependent on rain-fed crops, working from dawn until dusk just to grow enough cassava or rice to feed their immediate household.
Just to survive.
Right. If the rains are good, maybe they have a tiny surplus left over to trade at a local market for cooking oil or basic medicine. If the rains fail, they face immediate malnutrition. It is a profoundly precarious existence.
And without surplus capital, you can't buy better tools, you can't buy fertilizer, and you just can't escape the cycle.
Which leads directly to a terrifying statistical classification known as vulnerable employment. In a formal economy, employment usually means a contract, a steady salary, maybe health insurance, some safety nets. Vulnerable employment is the exact opposite.
It's unpaid family workers or like precarious self-employment, right?
Precisely. Street vendors, subsistence farmers, day laborers, jobs with absolutely no safety net. If you get sick, if you twist your ankle, or if the harvest fails, you instantly fall from vulnerable employment into extreme life-threatening poverty.
And the visual of this in the report is stunning. They use this 100 square waffle chart grid to show employment quality. And when you look at the grid for women, 93 of those squares are shaded dark gray.
It's unbelievable.
That means over 93% of employed women are in vulnerable employment. 93%. Now, men also face extreme vulnerability. The male vulnerable employment rate is also sky high. But that gender disparity, that near total exclusion of women from formal safety nets is just glaring.
It means that a woman holding a formal salaried job is practically a statistical anomaly. The vast, overwhelming majority of female human capital in the country is locked into unpaid domestic labor or precarious informal trading.
Okay, but looking at all this, the back-breaking subsistence farming, the total lack of formal jobs, I have to ask, Why can't these workers just transition into manufacturing or services like we've seen in other developing nations?
It's the logical next step, right?
We saw it in Southeast Asia. You build textile plants in the cities, the farmers move to the urban centers, they get factory jobs, and they step onto the first rung of the formal economic ladder.
Yeah.
What's physically keeping them in these vulnerable, low-yield farming roles?
That is the essential question of modern development economics. Why can't they just make the leap? And the brutal answer is that a transition requires foundational human capital. You cannot build a factory and expect it to run without a workforce capable of running it.
Meaning they need specific skills.
Not even just skills. I'm talking about basic physical health and stamina and basic literacy and numeracy. If your population is battling chronic, debilitating illness every few weeks, they cannot maintain the rigorous schedule of factory production.
Wow, so the transition is physically blocked.
Exactly. Which leads directly to the next critical bottleneck in the country's development. To understand why the workforce is trapped, we have to look at the biological and infrastructural realities of simply staying alive in Sierra Leone. We have to look at the starting line.
And that's where this economic problem becomes a visceral biological one. Because, man, the statistics from the early stages of human capital in this report are grim. Now, to be fair, there is a slow downward trend recently, but infant and under 5 mortality rates remain at historically high absolute levels.
Right, because when we talk about accumulating human capital, the very first non-negotiable prerequisite is that a human being has to survive their own childhood. You cannot educate a child who does not live to see their 5th birthday.
Exactly. So what is the physical mechanism causing this mortality? Because parents everywhere will do anything to protect their kids. The expert analysis in the report explains why. The underlying public health infrastructure is critically deficient.
It's a massive structural deficit in basic water, sanitation, and hygiene, the Wadi-esh infrastructure. And there is a massive urban and rural divide here.
The numbers for the rural areas are shocking. The data indicates that the open defecation rate in rural areas is near 35%.
And we need to explain what that actually means. When a third of the population has no sanitation facilities, human waste inevitably enters the local environment. When the seasonal rains come, that waste is washed directly into the rivers, the streams, and the shallow groundwater wells that the entire village relies on for drinking water.
Which leads instantly to the rampant spread of waterborne pathogens.
Exactly. It's a direct cyclical contamination of the local water table. But what is truly concerning is that this infrastructure deficit is not confined to remote rural villages.
Yeah, the urban numbers completely threw me. You generally assume that cities have at least a baseline of municipal infrastructure. But the report notes that in urban centers, only about 20% of the population has access to basic hand-washing facilities at home.
Only 1 in 5 urban residents.
How is that even possible in a major city?
It's a combination of what's fascinating here is how infrastructure directly dictates economics. A lack of safe drinking water and sanitation isn't just a health crisis, it's an economic anchor.
How so?
Well, it drains productivity, right? It forces parents out of work to care for sick children. But beyond the immediate mortality, there is childhood stunting. When an infant is constantly battling intestinal infections from dirty water, their body is in a state of chronic stress.
Survival mode.
Exactly. The body rations the calories. And the first thing to be sacrificed is physical growth and, crucially, brain development. Stunting is a permanent, irreversible underdevelopment of cognitive mass.
So you are permanently capping their future intellectual capacity.
Yes. From an economic standpoint, you have destroyed a massive portion of your future human capital before that child has even set foot in a classroom. They will earn significantly less as adults, they will be less innovative, and they will be less productive.
Okay, so let's follow the timeline. If a child survives those initial health hurdles, they face the next filter, the education system. And showing up to school does not equal learning.
Not at all.
The report introduces this concept of learning poverty. Youth literacy for ages 15 to 24 hovers stubbornly around 73 to 77%. And the visual they use is a leaky funnel.
The leaky funnel is a perfect metaphor.
Right. Kids enter primary school, but there are massive dropouts, overage students, and high repetition rates in middle and high school, meaning the knowledge basically drains out before graduation.
Because the classrooms are overcrowded, teachers are absent, and basic learning materials are scarce. So a student repeats grade 3, then grade 4. And eventually, the opportunity cost becomes too high for the family trapped in subsistence farming. The funnel leaks so badly that the output of skilled graduates is a mere trickle.
But the report zeroes in on the most devastating leak in that funnel: systemic gender inequality.
Yes. the systemic marginalization of female potential.
The report literally says women's potential is being folded away. They have this radar chart that shows a massive contraction in female potential compared to men. It shows incredibly low completion rates for secondary and tertiary education, compounded by significant rates of early marriage and adolescent motherhood.
When a family is living on the brink of starvation, daughters are often viewed, tragically, through an economic lens. Marrying a daughter off early offloads the economic burden and might secure a bride price.
It is a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
But the moment that early marriage happens, her formal education stops instantly.
Immediately. She is transitioned directly into that 93% vulnerable employment statistic we discussed earlier.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I mean, from a macroeconomic perspective.
Yeah.
If a country is already struggling to grow, how can it afford to sideline half its team?
It cannot. It absolutely cannot. The economic penalty of early childhood pregnancy and lack of female higher education is a hard ceiling on Sierra Leone's GDP. Empowering women isn't just a social goal here. It is an urgent existential macroeconomic necessity to escape the agricultural trap. You cannot grow if you sideline half your workforce.
Okay, so with a vulnerable workforce, poor health infrastructure, and a leaky education system, how does the country even stay afloat financially? Because the lights are still on.
Barely. To answer that, we have to look outside its borders. We have to look at global lifelines, trade deficits, international aid, and the governance barrier.
Let's start with the trade nightmare. Sierra Leone is deeply dependent on primary products, like minerals and basic agriculture. The report states that high-tech or value-added exports represent less than 1% of total manufactured exports. Less than 1%.
They are completely locked out of the global value chain. They are selling the raw ingredients for pennies and buying the finished manufactured goods from the rest of the world for dollars.
The result is a persistent, massive trade deficit running into hundreds of millions of dollars. So how do they cover the shortfall?
Through what is vividly described in the report as the external blood transfusion. Official Development Assistance, or ODA.
Foreign aid.
Exactly. Sierra Leone is highly dependent on international aid. During crisis years, net ODA received spiked to $134 per capita.
Wow.
Astonishingly, at times, external aid represents more than 100% of the country's gross capital formation.
Wait, more than 100%. Meaning without foreign aid, domestic investment would essentially cease to exist.
Exactly. Every single brick laid for a new school, every mile of paved road, is entirely subsidized by the outside world. The internal mechanism for building the future is completely broken.
But we know there is wealth in the ground. Why isn't private investment coming in to build this infrastructure? Why isn't a multinational mining conglomerate paving the roads?
Well, capital is like water. It flows toward opportunity, but it avoids resistance. And the resistance here is the governance barrier.
Let's look at the governance metrics. On the World Bank's worldwide governance indicators, the WGI, Sierra Leone, scores consistently in the negative range, between negative 0.5 to negative 1.5 for rule of law, government effectiveness, and control of corruption.
Foreign aid acts as a vital life support system during crises, but it doesn't cure the disease. A negative rule of law score means a foreign investor can't trust a judge to enforce a contract. A negative control of corruption score means unpredictable daily operational costs, like bribes at customs.
Right.
The poor governance environment acts as a severe deterrent to both domestic entrepreneurs and foreign direct investment. It keeps the country reliant on raw resource extraction because the governance dam is keeping the value-adding capital out.
Okay, wow. We have painted a stark picture today.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for the listener and, more importantly, for Sierra Leone? Is there a way out, or is it a lost cause?
It is absolutely not a lost cause. The report suggests there is a clear blueprint for transformation. The data contains what economists call green shoots.
Oh yeah, the green shoots. I eagerly wanted to share these from the report. There's been a massive, explosive growth in mobile cellular subscriptions, jumping from near zero to millions.
It's a digital leapfrog.
Right. And alongside this digital dawn, the services sector is slowly climbing in both GDP contribution and employment. People are innovating.
The human capital is fighting to express itself. But to truly break the resource curse, the government must adopt the transformation logic from the 14th slide of the report, the ultimate policy recommendation to stop eating the seed corn.
Walk us through that logic. How do they fix the pipeline?
The country must engineer a direct pipeline. Take the taxes and rents from mineral and forestry extraction, and instead of consuming them, immediately lock them into human capital investments.
So using the diamond money to fund basic rural sanitation.
Yes. Dig the wells, pipe the clean water, stop the stunting. Then you aggressively fund education to end learning poverty.
And crucially, based on what we saw earlier, aggressively fund female economic empowerment.
Exactly. Keep girls in school, delay early marriage. This is how you flip the adjusted net savings from negative to positive. You convert a finite physical capital into an infinite intellectual capital.
It's like taking the money from selling the family silver, but instead of buying groceries, you use it to send the kids to college so they can eventually buy the silver back.
Exactly. That synthesizes the entire deep dive. Sierra Leone's transformation paradox is that its reliance on natural capital has blinded it to its true wealth. The SWOT analysis on the final slide makes it clear. The path forward requires a total reevaluation of what makes a nation rich.
And as we wrap up, I want to thank you, the listener, for coming on this deep dive into Sierra Leone's economic puzzle. The ultimate takeaway is clear. A nation's true wealth isn't the diamonds beneath the ground, but the youth standing above it.
And I want to leave the listener with a final, lingering question to ponder. Consider your own country or the global economy. We've seen how Sierra Leone is trapped by exporting cheap raw materials while neglecting human capital. If the global south collectively decides to stop subsidizing the world's cheap resources and instead aggressively hoards that wealth to build their own human capital, how dramatically will the prices of our everyday goods and the balance of global power shift in the next 20 years?
Wow. That is an incredibly provocative thought. It really makes you realize there is always a deeper story hidden in the data. Keep questioning the numbers you see in the news, look for the mechanics behind the data, and always keep looking for the real wealth. Until next time, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.